The morning Beatrice Morgan stepped off the stagecoach in Elko, Nevada, in the spring of 1872, every man within eyesight stopped what he was doing to stare at the young woman who looked like she had just walked out of a Boston finishing school and directly into the harshest territory the West had to offer. She wore a pristine blue traveling dress with more buttons than seemed practical, her chestnut hair pinned so tightly beneath her bonnet that not a single strand dared escape, and she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had been taught that slouching was a cardinal sin. The two older women standing outside the general store shook their heads in unison, their expressions a mixture of pity and concern. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson whispered to Mrs. Cooper, though not quietly enough. "Look at her. She knows nothing of men, you can tell. Probably never been alone with one in her entire life." "Tragic, really," Mrs. Cooper agreed, fanning herself against the already mounting heat. "What business does a girl like that have out here? She will be eaten alive." Beatrice pretended not to hear them, though her cheeks flushed pink and her grip tightened on her small leather satchel. She had heard variations of the same sentiment from nearly everyone since she had announced her intention to travel west to take up the teaching position in Elko. Her mother had wept. Her father had forbidden it, though she had gone anyway once she turned 21 just 3 months prior. Her younger sisters had looked at her with wide eyes, as though she were embarking on a journey to the moon rather than simply across the country. The truth was that they were not entirely wrong. Beatrice had lived a sheltered life in Philadelphia, raised by parents who believed that a woman's virtue was her most precious possession, and that men were creatures to be managed from a safe distance until one made a suitable offer of marriage. She had attended a girls' academy where the headmistress had lectured extensively on the dangers of masculine attention and the importance of maintaining proper boundaries at all times. Beatrice had never been kissed, never been courted, never even held a man's hand outside of the formal greeting her father's business associates offered when introduced. But she had also grown tired of the suffocating expectations, the endless embroidery circles, the shallow conversations about weather and fashion. When she had seen the advertisement seeking a schoolteacher for a growing town in Nevada, something inside her had sparked to life. She wanted adventure, purpose, a life that was hers to shape rather than one dictated by society's narrow vision of what a woman should be. Now, standing in the dusty street with the hot sun beating down and the reality of her decision settling over her like the grit that seemed to coat everything, Beatrice felt the first tremor of doubt. Elko was rougher than she had imagined. The buildings were a mixture of weathered wood and canvas, the street was rutted and dry, and every person she saw looked worn and practical in a way that made her feel absurdly overdressed and unprepared. "You the new teacher?" Beatrice turned to find a portly man in a vest and shirt sleeves approaching, his expression kind beneath his impressive mustache. "Yes, I am Beatrice Morgan." "Elias Whitman, mayor of Elko and owner of the Mercantile." He tipped his hat. "We are mighty glad to have you, Miss Morgan. The children have been without proper schooling for near 6 months now since our last teacher moved on to California." "I am pleased to be here," Beatrice said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I am eager to begin my duties." Whitman's expression grew uncertain. "About that. There has been a small complication with your accommodations. The room we had arranged above the schoolhouse, well, the roof has some damage from the winter storms. It would not be suitable until repairs are made." Beatrice's stomach sank. "I see. Is there a hotel where I might stay temporarily?" "There is, but I would not recommend it for a lady traveling alone. It caters mostly to miners and railroad men, and it can get rather rowdy." Whitman scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I've been trying to think of a solution. Most of the families in town are already crowded, but I am certain we can find something." "Perhaps I could help." The voice came from behind Beatrice, deep and resonant in a way that seemed to vibrate through her entire body. She turned and found herself looking up, and then up some more, at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His chest and arms strained against the fabric of his worn linen shirt, every movement revealing the powerful muscles beneath. His hair was dark and thick, falling past his collar in waves that suggested he cut it himself when it got too long to be practical. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught Beatrice's attention, a striking pale blue that seemed almost startling against his tanned skin. "Jacob Northwood," Mayor Whitman said, and Beatrice detected a note of relief in his voice. "I did not know you were in town." "Brought down some pelts to trade," Jacob said, his gaze fixed on Beatrice in a way that made her feel both exposed and oddly safe at the same time. "Heard you talking about accommodations for the new teacher." "We have a situation, yes," Whitman admitted. "I do not suppose you know of anyone who might have space." Jacob was quiet for a moment, still looking at Beatrice with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to meet his eyes. "My cabin is about 5 miles north of town, up in the foothills. I have a spare room. She would be safe there while the schoolhouse is repaired." The suggestion hung in the air like something solid. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly. Mrs. Cooper made a sound that might have been a scandalized squeak. Even Mayor Whitman looked uncertain. "Now, Jacob, I appreciate the offer, but I do not know if that would be proper. Miss Morgan is a respectable young lady, and you are a bachelor living alone. I am also the only person within 20 miles who has the space, and would sooner die than let harm come to a woman under my protection," Jacob said evenly. His gaze shifted to the mayor, and there was steel in it. "You know me, Elias. You know my word is good." Whitman nodded slowly. "I do know that, but it is not my reputation at stake. It is Miss Morgan's." Both men turned to look at Beatrice, waiting for her to speak. She felt the weight of every eye in the street upon her, felt the judgment and pity radiating from the watching women. They all expected her to refuse, to choose propriety over practicality, to prove them right in their assessment that she was too sheltered and naive to survive in this harsh place. "What do you think of this arrangement, Miss Morgan?" Jacob asked, and there was something gentle in his rough voice that made her actually consider his offer rather than dismiss it outright. Beatrice looked at him properly, trying to see past the intimidating size and wild appearance to the man beneath. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands, though large and calloused, were steady and careful as they held his hat. His expression was open and honest, without any trace of the leering calculation she had learned to recognize in men with improper intentions. "Would I truly be safe?" she asked quietly. "You have my word," Jacob said, and the simplicity of the statement carried more conviction than any flowery speech could have. "I live alone because I prefer the quiet and the mountains. I am not looking for anything improper, Miss Morgan. I'm just offering a roof and walls until yours are ready." "He is a good man, Beatrice," Whitman added, using her first name in his earnestness. "Bit rough around the edges, but honest as they come. The cabin is sturdy and well maintained. You would have your own room with a door that bars from the inside." Beatrice thought of the hotel full of rowdy miners, of imposing on already crowded families, of the alternative of returning to Philadelphia in defeat before she had even begun. She thought of how everyone expected her to fail, to prove them right in their conviction that she was too soft and sheltered for this life. "I accept your offer, Mr. Northwood," she said firmly, "and I thank you for your generosity." If Jacob was surprised by her decision, he did not show it. He simply nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "I need to finish my business in town. Can you be ready to leave in an hour?" "I can be ready in 30 minutes. The corner of Jacob's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "The wagon will be in front of the mercantile when you are ready." He walked away without another word, his long strides carrying him down the street toward the trading post. Beatrice watched him go, aware that she had just made a decision that would likely scandalize everyone she knew, both here and back home. But she had not come all this way to let fear and propriety dictate her choices. Why eatful? "Well," Mayor Whitman said, sounding both impressed and concerned, "that is settled then. Let me help you get your things, Miss Morgan, and perhaps we should discuss what supplies you might need for your stay." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice met the members of the school board, was shown the schoolhouse that would be her domain once she could actually reside there, and received what felt like 100 pieces of advice from well-meaning townspeople. Several women made pointed comments about the impropriety of her arrangement, though none of them offered alternatives. The men seemed less concerned, several of them nodding approvingly when they heard Jacob's name. "Old Jake will keep you safe," one grizzled prospector told her. "He has got the reputation as a hard man, but fair. Heard tell he once tracked a group of raiders for 3 days after they stole horses from a family down south, brought back every animal, and left the thieves tied up for the marshal." When Beatrice finally emerged from the mercantile with her modest trunk and bags, she found Jacob waiting beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 large horses. He had changed into a clean shirt and had apparently used the time to get supplies of his own, as the wagon bed was loaded with sacks and crates. "That everything?" he asked, reaching for her trunk before she could answer. He lifted it as though it weighed nothing at all, muscles flexing beneath his shirt as he set it carefully in the wagon. Beatrice tried not to stare at the display of casual strength, but it was unlike anything she had witnessed before. The men she knew in Philadelphia were soft around the middle, their strength measured in bank accounts rather than physical capability. "Yes, that's everything," she managed, then looked at the high wagon seat with some trepidation. Her dress was not designed for climbing. Jacob noticed her hesitation and moved to her side. "May I?" Before she could fully process what he intended, he had placed his large hands around her waist and lifted her onto the seat as easily as he had lifted her trunk. The brief contact left her feeling flustered and warm, though she told herself it was just the heat of the day. He swung up beside her with practiced ease, gathered the reins, and clicked his tongue to set the horses moving. They rolled out of Elko with curious eyes following them, and Beatrice fought the urge to look back. For the first mile, they rode in silence. The road, such as it was, curved north into rolling foothills dotted with sage and scrub. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the spring warmth. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that was entirely different from the manicured parks and gardens of home. "You are not what I expected," Jacob said suddenly. Beatrice glanced at him. "What did you expect?" "Someone older, I suppose, harder. The West does not usually attract young women from good families." He kept his eyes on the road. "Why did you come here, Miss Morgan?" "I wanted to teach," she said, "and I wanted to see something different from Philadelphia." "You're seeing different, all right." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Those women in town, they pitied you." Beatrice stiffened. "I heard them. They think you know nothing of men, nothing of how hard things are out here." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Do they have the right of it?" She could have been offended by his bluntness, but there was no malice in the question, only curiosity. "I suppose they do in some ways. I've lived a very protected life. But I'm not stupid, Mr. Northwood, and I'm not helpless. I can learn." "I reckon you can," he agreed. "And for what it is worth, while you are under my roof, you will know only good things from me. I give you my word on that." The simple declaration should not have affected her as much as it did, but Beatrice felt something in her chest ease at his words. "Why did you offer to help me? You do not know me at all." Jacob considered the question as he guided the horses around a rocky section of road. "I know what it is like to be judged before anyone knows who you are. When I first came out here, I was young and angry, and people assumed the worst. Someone took a chance on me anyway, gave me work and a place to stay when I had nothing. I figure I owe it to the world to do the same when I can." "That's very kind of you." "Not kind, just fair." He glanced at her and she saw something flicker in those pale blue eyes. "Besides, I heard what those women said, about you knowing nothing of men. Seemed wrong to leave you at their mercy when I could offer something better." They lapsed back into silence, but it was more comfortable now, the initial awkwardness fading. Beatrice found herself relaxing slightly, though she remained acutely aware of Jacob's presence beside her, the solid warmth of him, and the capable way he handled the horses and the terrain. The cabin appeared after nearly an hour of steady climbing. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, built of thick logs with a sturdy roof and a covered porch. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and Beatrice realized he must have banked the fire before leaving that morning. It was larger than she expected, well-maintained and solid, with shutters on the windows and what looked like a small barn and corral behind it. "It is not fancy," Jacob said, bringing the wagon to a stop, "but it is dry and warm and the roof does not leak." "It is wonderful," Beatrice said honestly. After the long journey and the uncertainty of the day, the cabin looked like a haven. Jacob helped her down from the wagon, his hands once again spanning her waist with that casual strength that made her feel delicate in a way she never had before. He carried her trunk inside while she followed, stepping into a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking chairs arranged before it. The kitchen was simple but well-equipped, and everything was clean and orderly in a way that surprised her. "That's your room there," Jacob said, nodding to a door on the right side of the room. "I sleep in the loft." He pointed to a ladder leading to an open loft space above. "There is a bar for your door, and the window has a good latch. You will have your privacy." Beatrice opened the door to find a small but adequate room with a real bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. The window looked out over the clearing toward the mountains beyond. "This is more than sufficient. Thank you, Mr. Northwood." "Jacob," he corrected, "if we are going to be sharing a roof, even temporarily, we might as well use Christian names. With your permission, Miss Morgan." "Beatrice," she offered, "or Bay if you prefer." "Beatrice," he repeated, and something about the way he said her full name in that deep voice made her feel warm again. "I will bring in the rest of your things, then I need to see to the horses and check my traps up the mountain. I will likely be gone until evening. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. There is a well outside for fresh water, and the necessary is behind the cabin." He was giving her space, Beatrice realized, giving her time to adjust and settle without his intimidating presence. She appreciated it more than she could say. "Thank you, Jacob." He nodded and headed back outside, leaving her alone in her new temporary home. Beatrice unpacked her belongings, hanging her few dresses in the small closet and arranging her books and teaching materials on the chest of drawers. She explored the main room cautiously, noting the well-stocked pantry, the collection of well-used but well-maintained tools, the few books on a shelf near the fireplace. Everything about the cabin spoke of a man who lived deliberately and carefully, who took pride in his space despite living alone. It was not what she would have expected from a mountain man, and she found herself curious about Jacob Northwood and what had brought him to this solitary life. By the time he returned that evening, Beatrice had familiarized herself with the cabin and had attempted to prepare a meal from the supplies she found. The results were mixed at best. She had never been much of a cook, as the family had always employed kitchen staff, and her attempts at biscuits had produced something closer to rocks. Jacob surveyed the table with an expression that might have been amusement. "You made dinner." "I tried," Beatrice admitted. "I fear I am not very accomplished in the kitchen." "The stew smells good," he said diplomatically, though his eyes lingered on the biscuits. They sat down to eat, and Beatrice was relieved to find that the stew was at least edible, even if it was not particularly flavorful. Jacob ate with good appetite, not complaining once, though he carefully avoided the biscuits. "You do not have to pretend," Beatrice said finally. "I know they are terrible." Jacob picked up one of the biscuits and tapped it against his plate with a hollow thunk. Despite herself, Beatrice laughed, and after a moment, Jacob's mouth curved into a genuine smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost handsome. "I appreciate the effort," he said, "but maybe tomorrow I will show you how I make them. They are not fancy, but they are at least chewable." "I would appreciate that," Beatrice said. "I'm afraid my education was severely lacking in practical skills." "What did they teach you?" Jacob asked, leaning back in his chair. "Languages, literature, music, art, deportment, needlework," Beatrice ticked off on her fingers. "All the things necessary to be an accomplished young lady in society, none of the things necessary to survive in Nevada. You can read and write and do numbers well enough to teach. That is more than most people out here can say." Jacob's expression grew thoughtful. "The rest you can learn if you want to." "I do want to," Beatrice said firmly. "I did not come all this way to remain helpless." Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a glimmer of respect. "Then I will teach you what I can while you are here. Fair trade for the inconvenience of having a house guest. It is your house. I am the inconvenience. You are not an inconvenience, Beatrice." The way he said it, quiet and certain, made her believe him. They cleaned up together after dinner, Jacob showing her where things belonged and how he organized his supplies. It was strangely domestic, standing beside him at the wash basin, and Beatrice found herself hyper-aware of his proximity. the way his arm brushed hers when he reached for a plate, the warmth radiating from his large frame. That night, lying in the narrow bed in her small room with the bar firmly in place and the mountain silence pressing in around her, Beatrice reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Less than 12 hours ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach, feeling lost and overwhelmed. Now she was staying in a mountain cabin with a man she had just met, and somehow, impossibly, she felt safer than she had in all her years of protected living in Philadelphia. She fell asleep to the sound of Jacob moving quietly in the loft above, the cabin settling around her, and the wind whispering through the pines outside her window. The next morning, Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler day dresses and emerged to find Jacob already up and cooking breakfast with efficient movements. "Morning," he greeted. "Coffee is ready if you want some." The coffee was strong and black and unlike anything Beatrice had tasted before, but it chased away the cobwebs of sleep effectively. She watched as Jacob expertly flipped bacon and stirred something in a pan that turned out to be cornmeal mush. "Today I will show you the basics," he said as they ate. "How to make bread and biscuits, how to manage the fire, how to keep track of supplies. Tomorrow we can work on other things if you want." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Beatrice asked. "Truly, you must have better things to do than teach a city woman how to survive in the mountains." Jacob set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Because those women in town were right. You do not know anything about men, at least not men like the ones you will encounter out here. You do not know how to read danger or protect yourself or even feed yourself properly." He paused. "But that is not your fault. Nobody taught you. So I figure if you are going to be out here teaching children, someone should teach you what you need to know. And I would rather it be me, someone who has no designs on you, than someone who might take advantage." "How do I know you have no designs on me?" The question was bold, perhaps too bold, but Beatrice needed to understand. "Because if I did, I would not have given you a room with a bar on the door," Jacob said simply, "and because I am giving you my word right now that I will never touch you in any way you do not clearly want. Your safety and your virtue are as secure with me as they would be in a church." Beatrice believed him. There was something fundamentally honest about Jacob Northwood, a straightforwardness that was refreshing after a lifetime of navigating the subtle games and hidden intentions of polite society. "Then I accept your offer to teach me," she said, "and I thank you for it." The next several days fell into a pattern. Each morning, Jacob would teach Beatrice something new: how to build and maintain a fire, how to judge the heat of an oven, how to make bread that actually rose properly, how to identify edible plants and which mushrooms to avoid, how to draw water efficiently from the well, and how to preserve food for storage. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things, always willing to demonstrate again if she struggled. In return, Beatrice found ways to make herself useful. She organized his supplies more efficiently, mended his clothes with neat stitches far superior to his rough attempts, and even began reading aloud in the evenings from the books she had brought. Jacob would sit in his chair by the fire, working on various tasks with his hands while listening to her voice, and Beatrice discovered she enjoyed the peaceful companionship. She also discovered that living in close quarters with Jacob was affecting her in ways she had not anticipated. She found herself watching the way his muscles moved when he chopped wood, the casual strength with which he handled heavy tasks. She noticed the gentleness in his large hands when he showed her how to knead bread, the patience in his voice when he explained something for the third time. She became aware of the way he smelled of pine and wood smoke, and something earthy that was uniquely him. It confused her, these new feelings and awareness. Her education had taught her that physical attraction was something base and improper, something to be controlled and suppressed. But there was nothing base about the way she felt when Jacob smiled at her, or the warmth that spread through her chest when he praised her for successfully completing a task. One afternoon, about a week into her stay, Jacob decided it was time to teach her to shoot. "You should know how to handle a gun," he said, selecting a rifle from his collection. "Not because I think you will need to, but because it is better to know and not need it than need it and not know." He took her outside to a cleared area where he had set up targets against the hillside. The rifle was heavier than Beatrice expected, and she struggled to hold it properly until Jacob moved behind her, his arms coming around to adjust her grip. "Like this," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Stock firm against your shoulder, sight down the barrel, squeeze the trigger gently." Beatrice could barely concentrate on his instructions with him standing so close, his chest against her back, his hands warm over hers. She tried to focus on the target, on the feeling of the weapon, on anything except the way her heart was racing. "Now try," Jacob said, stepping back. She missed the target entirely on her first shot, the recoil surprising her, but Jacob just loaded another round and had her try again and again. By the end of the afternoon, she was actually hitting the targets more often than not, and she felt a surge of pride at the accomplishment. "You are a good teacher," she told Jacob as they walked back to the cabin. "You are a good student," he replied. "You do not give up easy." That evening, as Beatrice prepared dinner with considerably more skill than she had possessed a week ago, she became aware of Jacob watching her from his seat by the fire. When she glanced at him, she found an expression on his face that she could not quite read, something intense and searching. "What is it?" she asked. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "You are different than you were when you first arrived." "How so?" "More confident, more comfortable in your own skin." He paused. "More beautiful." The word hung in the air between them. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she could not look away from his gaze. "Jacob." He stood abruptly. "I should not have said that. Forgive me. It was improper." "It was honest," Beatrice said softly. "You have been nothing but honest with me since we met." "Honesty can be dangerous," Jacob said, but he did not elaborate. Instead, he headed for the door. "I need to check the horses." He left, and Beatrice stood alone in the cabin, her heart pounding and her thoughts in turmoil. She knew what was happening, could feel it growing between them with every passing day. She was falling for Jacob Northwood, this rough mountain man who had shown her more kindness and respect than any so-called gentleman in Philadelphia ever had. The question was whether he felt the same, and if so, what either of them intended to do about it. The answer came 2 nights later, under circumstances neither of them expected. Beatrice woke in the darkness to the sound of horses whinnying in distress and Jacob moving rapidly in the loft above. She heard him descend the ladder quickly, heard the sound of him loading his rifle. "Stay inside," he said quietly but firmly through her door. "Bar it behind me and do not open it for anyone but me." "What is happening?" Beatrice asked, fear making her voice shake. "Probably just a mountain lion spooking the horses, but I need to check." "Stay inside, Beatrice. I mean it." She heard the door open and close, heard his footsteps on the porch. For a moment she stood frozen in her room, torn between obeying his instructions and the need to know what was happening. Then she heard shouting, men's voices that were definitely not Jacob's, and the decision was made for her. Beatrice grabbed the rifle Jacob had been teaching her to use, checked that it was loaded the way he had shown her, and moved to the window. In the moonlight, she could see 3 men on horses in the clearing, and Jacob standing between them and the cabin, his own rifle raised. "I do not want trouble," Jacob was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "But you need to move on, now." "We just want some supplies, mountain man," one of the riders said. He was a rough-looking character with a bandana over his face. "And maybe whatever else you got worth taking." "There is nothing here for you," Jacob said. "Last chance to ride away." The rider laughed and reached for his gun. What happened next occurred so quickly that Beatrice barely processed it. Jacob fired once, and the gun flew from the man's hand with a yelp of pain. The other 2 riders went for their weapons, and Jacob worked his rifle with practiced speed, firing twice more. One shot took the hat off the second rider, the other kicked up dirt directly in front of the 3rd horse, causing it to rear. "Next shots will not be warnings," Jacob said, his voice hard as iron. "Get gone." The riders clearly believed him. They wheeled their horses and took off into the darkness, one of them cradling his injured hand. Jacob stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then turned back to the cabin. Beatrice met him at the door, still clutching the rifle. He took it from her gently and set it aside, then took her by the shoulders and looked her over carefully in the lamplight. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands warm and steady on her shoulders. "I'm fine. They never came near me." Beatrice was shaking now that the danger had passed. "Are you hurt?" "No." Jacob's hands slid down her arms and back up, as though he needed to reassure himself she was truly unharmed. "You should not have come out. I told you to stay in your room." "I needed to see that you were safe," Beatrice said, and suddenly her hands were on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the rapid beat of his heart that matched her own. "Beatrice," Jacob said, her name a warning and a plea all at once. "They were right, you know," Beatrice said, looking up at him. "Those women in town. I did not know anything about men. I still do not really. But I know you, Jacob. I know you are good and kind and strong. I know you make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way no one ever has before. And I know that somewhere in the last 2 weeks I have fallen completely in love with you." Jacob's eyes widened, his expression stunned. "You cannot mean that." "Why not?" "Because you barely know me. Because you are educated and refined, and I am just a mountain man with calloused hands and rough ways. Because you deserve better than a man who lives alone in the wilderness." His voice was rough with emotion. "Because those women pitied you for not knowing men, and I swore to myself you would know only good things from me. I will not take advantage of your gratitude or your innocence." "You are not taking advantage," Beatrice said firmly. "I am telling you how I feel. And yes, I was innocent and sheltered when I arrived here. But I'm not stupid, Jacob. I know my own heart. I know what I feel." "What you feel is gratitude and perhaps fascination with something different from your old life," Jacob said, but his hands had not left her arms and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Then prove me wrong," Beatrice challenged. "Kiss me. If there is nothing between us but gratitude and novelty, then a kiss will prove it." "Beatrice, I cannot. It would not be right." "Why? Because society says it is improper? I stopped caring what society thinks the moment I stepped on that stagecoach. Because you think I am too good for you? I am the one who gets to decide that, and I choose you." She moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Kiss me, Jacob. Please." For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and Beatrice thought he would refuse, would step back and put distance between them. But then something in his expression shifted, the careful control giving way to raw emotion. "God help me," he whispered, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like what Beatrice had imagined in her limited sheltered fantasies. It was not gentle or chaste or merely pleasant. It was heat and hunger, and a connection so powerful it made her knees weak. Jacob's arms came around her, pulling her against his broad chest, and she wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, wanting more of this incredible feeling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Beatrice, His voice was hoarse. "Do not tell me that meant nothing," Beatrice said. "Do not lie to me now, not after you have been so honest about everything else." "It meant everything," Jacob admitted. "That is the problem. I have been half in love with you since you stood in that dusty street and told the whole town you were brave enough to stay with me. Every day since has just made it worse. Better. I do not even know anymore." He pulled back to look at her. "But this is not just about what I want. You have a whole life ahead of you. Chances to meet men who can give you the kind of life you deserve." "I deserve a life I choose," Beatrice said. "I deserve a man who sees me as a partner, not a delicate ornament. I deserve someone who makes me want to be stronger and braver and more myself." She cupped his face with her hands, feeling the rasp of his beard against her palms. "I deserve you, Jacob Northwood, if you will have me." "If I will have you?" Jacob let out a breathless laugh. "Beatrice, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. When they finally moved apart, he kept her close, one arm around her waist as though he could not bear to let her go entirely. "What do we do now?" Beatrice asked. "Now we figure out how to do this properly," Jacob said. "You are still the town's schoolteacher, and your reputation matters. We will court properly, in the open, so everyone knows my intentions are honorable." "Your intentions are honorable," Beatrice agreed. "But what are they specifically?" Jacob smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "To marry you, if you will have me. To build a life together, to prove to you every day that you made the right choice." "Yes," Beatrice said simply. "Yes to all of it." They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other, both marveling at how quickly and completely their lives had changed. Outside, the mountain night was peaceful once more. the danger past and the future stretching out before them, full of possibility. The next morning, they rode into Elko together. The schoolhouse repairs were complete, and it was time for Beatrice to move into her proper accommodations and begin her teaching duties. But there was another reason for the trip, one that became clear when Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile and helped Beatrice down with careful hands. Mayor Whitman emerged to greet them, taking in their joined hands and the way they stood close together. His eyebrows rose. "Well now, this is an interesting development." "I would like to formally request permission to court Miss Morgan," Jacob said, his voice steady and clear, "with the intention of marriage." The mayor's surprise gave way to a broad smile. "Well, I will be." That did not take long. "When you know," Jacob said simply, looking at Beatrice with such warmth that she felt it down to her bones. "And you, Miss Morgan?" Whitman asked. "You are agreeable to this?" "Very much so," Beatrice confirmed. The news spread through Elko faster than wildfire. By the time Beatrice had settled into her room above the schoolhouse, half the town seemed to know that the proper schoolteacher from Philadelphia and the solitary mountain man were courting. The reactions were mixed. Some people were scandalized, others amused, and a few openly delighted. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Cooper cornered Beatrice at the mercantile that afternoon, their expressions a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. "My dear," Mrs. Henderson began, "are you certain about this? Mr. Northwood is a good man, but he is so very different from what you must be accustomed to." "He is different," Beatrice agreed, "and I'm grateful for it." "But surely you could find someone more suitable," Mrs. Cooper pressed, "someone refined and educated." "Jacob is both refined and educated in the ways that matter," Beatrice said firmly. "He is kind and honorable and treats me with more respect than any man I have ever known. That is what makes him suitable." The women exchanged glances, clearly not convinced. "We only worry because you know so little of men," Mrs. Henderson said. "We would hate to see you make a mistake out of naivety." "I appreciate your concern," Beatrice said, keeping her voice level. "But I'm not naive about this. I know exactly what I'm choosing." As the women walked away, still whispering to each other, Beatrice felt a surge of frustration. She understood their concern came from a good place, but it rankled that everyone seemed to think she was incapable of making her own decisions about her own life. Jacob seemed to sense her mood when he came to call that evening. They sat on the steps of the schoolhouse as the sun set, painting the Nevada sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. "People talking?" he asked. "Endlessly," Beatrice confirmed. "They all think I am making a terrible mistake." "Are you?" There was vulnerability in the question, despite his steady tone. Beatrice took his hand, lacing her fingers through his much larger ones. "Not even slightly, but I wish they would trust me to know my own mind." "Give them time," Jacob said. "They will see we are serious. They will see I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of you." "You already are worthy," Beatrice said. "I wish you could see yourself the way I see you." Jacob lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, incongruous coming from a man in buckskin and homespun, but it made Beatrice's heart flutter nonetheless. "Tell me about your life before," she asked. "You know everything about me, but I know so little about you." Jacob was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing absently over her knuckles. "Not much to tell. I grew up in Missouri, on a farm. My father was a hard man, quick with his fists and his judgment. My mother died when I was young. I left home at 17 and headed west, worked as a trapper and a guide, eventually made my way here to Nevada." He paused. "I have lived alone for the better part of 10 years because it seemed easier than trying to fit into places that did not want me." "What changed?" Beatrice asked softly. "You did." He looked at her, his pale blue eyes intense in the fading light. "You made me want to be part of something again, want to build instead of just survive." "Then that is what we will do," Beatrice said, "together." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Beatrice's life. She threw herself into teaching, finding joy in the eager faces of her students and satisfaction in watching them learn and grow. The children came from all over the area, ranging in age from 6 to 15, and they were hungry for education in a way her privileged students back east had never been. Jacob came to town every few days, always with some excuse. He needed supplies, or he had pelts to trade, or he was checking on someone. But everyone knew the real reason was to see Beatrice. They would walk together through town or sit on the schoolhouse steps talking for hours. He brought her wildflowers from the mountains and taught her the names of the plants and animals. She read to him from the books she loved and shared her dreams for the school and the students. They were chaperoned most of the time, as propriety demanded, but there were stolen moments. A kiss in the shadowed alley beside the mercantile, held hands under the table at the community dinner, whispered words in the quiet of evening that spoke of love and longing and plans for the future. 3 months after they began courting, Jacob asked Beatrice to ride out to his cabin with him. It was a Saturday, and she had no teaching duties. Mayor Whitman's wife agreed to act as chaperone for propriety's sake, though she dozed off in the wagon within the first mile, leaving them effectively alone. "I want to show you something," Jacob said as they approached the cabin. He led her around to the far side, where Beatrice saw that he had been building. The structure was still incomplete, but she could see it would be an addition to the main cabin, expanding it significantly. "I started this a month ago," Jacob said. "It will be a proper bedroom, with a real floor and a big window facing the mountains. And there, I'm planning a porch where we can sit in the evenings. And over there, eventually, a separate building for children to sleep when they are old enough to need their own space." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes as she understood what he was showing her. "You are building us a home." "I am building us a future," Jacob corrected. "If you still want it, if you are still certain." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Beatrice said. She turned to face him fully. "Ask me, Jacob." He smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a modest but beautiful sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of value she owned. She would have wanted you to have it." "Jacob." He dropped to one knee right there in the dirt and sawdust, still holding her hand. "Beatrice Morgan, you came into my life like spring after a hard winter. You made me believe in hope and connection and the possibility of happiness I thought I had given up on. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" "Yes," Beatrice said, pulling him to his feet so she could kiss him. "Yes. Absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. They stood there holding each other, the half-built addition at their backs and the mountains spreading out before them, and Beatrice felt a sense of rightness so profound it took her breath away. Mrs. Whitman chose that moment to wake up and discover them embracing. She sputtered for a moment, then saw the ring on Beatrice's finger, and broke into delighted laughter. "Well, it is about time. Come on, we need to get back to town and share the news." The announcement of their engagement was met with mixed reactions, as Beatrice had expected. Some people were genuinely happy for them, others remained skeptical. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Cooper looked as though they were attending a funeral rather than celebrating. "Such a shame," Beatrice heard Mrs. Cooper whisper to her friend. "That sweet, innocent girl, wasted on a rough mountain man." But there were others who saw things differently. The grizzled prospector who had spoken to Beatrice her first day in town clapped Jacob on the back and declared it the best news he had heard all year. Several of the ranch families expressed their approval, knowing Jacob as an honest and hard-working man. And the children in Beatrice's class were uniformly excited, as they had all met Jacob on his visits to town and found him far less intimidating than he appeared. The wedding was planned for early October, after the harvest, but before the mountain snows made travel difficult. Beatrice wrote to her family in Philadelphia, informing them of her engagement. Her mother's response was predictably horrified, full of pleas for Beatrice to reconsider and come home. Her father did not respond at all, but her youngest sister sent a letter full of excitement and romance, declaring Beatrice the bravest person she knew. In the months leading up to the wedding, Beatrice continued teaching while Jacob finished the addition to the cabin and made other preparations for their married life. They spent as much time together as propriety and their responsibilities allowed, and with each passing day, Beatrice became more certain she had made the right choice. She also learned more about the man she was going to marry. She learned he had a wry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable. She learned he was deeply patient and thoughtful, considering things carefully before speaking or acting. She learned he had a talent for woodworking, his large hands capable of surprisingly delicate work. And she learned that beneath the intimidating exterior was a man of deep feeling and profound kindness. One evening in late September, just weeks before their wedding, they sat together on the porch of the schoolhouse watching the stars emerge. Jacob had his arm around her shoulders, and Beatrice was tucked against his side, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. "Are you ever afraid?" she asked quietly. "About us, I mean. About whether we can make this work." "Every day," Jacob admitted. "I'm afraid I will not be the husband you deserve, that I will disappoint you somehow." "You could never disappoint me," Beatrice said firmly. I might. I have rough edges I have never bothered to smooth out. I prefer silence when you love conversation. I know nothing about the arts or literature or any of the refined things you were raised with. And I knew nothing about surviving in the wilderness or building a fire or any of the practical things you were raised with," Beatrice countered. "We teach each other. We balance each other. That is what makes us work." Jacob pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "How did you get so wise?" "I fell in love with you," Beatrice said simply. "That tends to clarify things." The wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon, with the aspen trees turned gold and the air crisp with the promise of winter. They were married in the small church in Elko, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Mayor Whitman gave Beatrice away, as her father had refused to make the journey. Jacob wore new clothes for the occasion, though Beatrice thought he looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire. But when she walked down the aisle and saw his face, saw the pure joy and love shining in his eyes, everything else faded away. There was only Jacob waiting for her, ready to promise her forever. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Jacob said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you and honor you all my days, to protect you and provide for you and make you laugh when you are sad, to be your partner and your friend and your home, wherever that home may be." When it was Beatrice's turn, she looked up at this man who had changed her entire world and spoke from her heart. "I promise to love you and stand beside you always, to challenge you and support you and choose you every single day, to build a life with you that is full of joy and purpose and love enough to last a lifetime." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Jacob he could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. The congregation erupted in applause, and as they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, Beatrice caught sight of Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Cooper dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the largest saloon in town, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was food and music and dancing, and Beatrice found herself swept up in the celebration. Jacob, who had claimed he did not know how to dance, proved to be a surprisingly capable partner, moving her around the floor with confident grace. "You lied to me," Beatrice accused, laughing. "You said you could not dance." "I said I did not dance," Jacob corrected. "I never said I could not. My mother taught me when I was young, but I have not had occasion to use the skill in years." "Well, I am glad you remember," Beatrice said, leaning into him as they swayed to the music. "Though I would have married you even if you had 2 left feet." "I would have married you even if you could not cook," Jacob replied, his eyes twinkling. "Though I am very glad you have learned." As the evening wore on and the sun set, Jacob leaned down to whisper in Beatrice's ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Northwood?" The sound of her new name sent a thrill through her. "Ready?" They slipped away from the celebration amid cheers and well-wishes, climbing into Jacob's wagon for the ride up to the cabin. The moon was full and bright, lighting their way, and Beatrice snuggled close to her husband, still marveling at the word. The cabin looked beautiful in the moonlight, the addition complete, and the whole structure solid and welcoming. Jacob had clearly been preparing for this night. There were lanterns lit inside, casting a warm glow through the windows, and when he carried her across the threshold, Beatrice saw he had filled the main room with wildflowers. "Jacob, it is beautiful," she breathed. "Not as beautiful as you," he said, setting her gently on her feet. His expression grew serious, vulnerable. "Beatrice, I know this is all new for you. We can take things as slowly as you need. There is no rush." Beatrice reached up to cup his face, feeling the familiar rasp of his beard under her palms. "I am not afraid," she said softly. "Not of this, not of you. I trust you completely." "I will be gentle," Jacob promised. "I will take care of you." "I know you will," Beatrice said. "You always have." That night, in the new bedroom Jacob had built for them, with the mountains standing silent guard outside the window, Beatrice learned what it meant to be truly intimate with another person. Jacob was patient and tender, guiding her through new sensations and feelings with the same care he had shown when teaching her to build a fire or shoot a rifle. And Beatrice discovered that physical love, when shared with someone you trusted completely, was nothing like the shameful, frightening thing her childhood education had implied. It was beautiful and connecting and right. Afterward, lying in Jacob's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Beatrice felt completely at peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Jacob replied, his arms tightening around her. "More than I thought it was possible to love another person." "Do you remember what those women said about me?" Beatrice asked. "That first day when I arrived?" "That you knew nothing of men," Jacob said. "They pitied me for it. And you said I would know only good things from you." Beatrice propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight. "You kept that promise, Jacob. Everything I have learned about love and partnership and what it means to be with a man, I have learned from you, and it has all been good." Jacob pulled her back down against him, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That is all I ever wanted, to be good for you, to give you reasons to be glad you chose me." "I am more than glad," Beatrice assured him. "I am grateful and blessed and completely, utterly happy." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the beginning of their married life stretching out before them, full of promise and possibility. The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and discoveries. Beatrice continued teaching at the schoolhouse, riding down from the cabin several days a week. Jacob continued his trapping and hunting, providing for them while also working on improvements to their home and land. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, learned when to give space and when to draw close, learned how to argue fairly and make up thoroughly. There were challenges. The winter was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept Beatrice from reaching the school for days at a time. Jacob taught her how to manage the cold, how to conserve heat and resources, how to read the weather and prepare accordingly. In the spring, flooding from snowmelt damaged part of their barn, requiring extensive repairs. That summer, a drought threatened the local farms and ranches, and they all had to ration water carefully. But there were far more joys than difficulties. Watching the sunrise from their porch while sharing morning coffee, working together in the garden they had planted behind the cabin. Long evenings by the fire, with Beatrice reading aloud while Jacob carved or mended tools. Lazy Sunday mornings in their big bed, talking and laughing and loving each other with ever-growing intimacy. In the spring of 1874, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening after dinner, too excited to wait for a more romantic moment. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down, his hands immediately going to her still flat belly with wonder. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Beatrice confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "In the late autumn, the doctor thinks." Jacob dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her stomach, as though he might hear something already. When he looked up at her, there were tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "You do not need to thank me for this," Beatrice said, running her fingers through his hair. "We made this baby together. But you are the one who will carry it and birth it and go through everything that entails," Jacob said. "So yes, I am thanking you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for giving me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered terrible nausea for the first few months, and as her belly grew, the mountain climate proved challenging. But Jacob was attentive and caring, taking on extra work so Beatrice could rest more, bringing her whatever she craved, reading to her when she was too tired to hold a book herself. She had to stop teaching in the late summer when travel became too difficult, and a temporary replacement was found. Beatrice missed her students, but she was also grateful for the time to prepare. Jacob had been building a cradle, beautiful and sturdy, with intricate carvings of mountains and pine trees. Several of the women from town came to help sew baby clothes and give advice, and even Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Cooper softened toward her, particularly after seeing how devoted Jacob was to his pregnant wife. "I suppose we may have misjudged him," Mrs. Henderson admitted one afternoon while helping Beatrice sort through baby linens. "He clearly adores you." "He does," Beatrice agreed, smiling, "and I adore him right back." "You were right to follow your heart," Mrs. Cooper added, somewhat grudgingly, "even if it did give us all quite the shock at the time." Their son was born on a cold November evening in 1874, after hours of difficult labor that terrified Jacob and exhausted Beatrice. But when the doctor finally placed the squalling baby boy in her arms, all the pain faded away. He was perfect, with dark hair like his father and eyes that would eventually settle into that same striking pale blue. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked Jacob, who was staring at his son with an expression of complete awe. "I do not know," Jacob admitted. "I never thought that far ahead. I was too busy worrying about making sure you both survived." "What was your mother's maiden name?" Beatrice asked. "Carter. Why?" "Carter Northwood," Beatrice said, testing it out. "It sounds strong, solid." "Carter," Jacob repeated, reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand with one massive finger. The baby's fingers wrapped around it instinctively, and Jacob's face crumpled with emotion. "Hello, Carter. I'm your father, and I promise I will be better at it than my father was at being mine." Watching her husband with their newborn son, Beatrice felt her heart overflow with love. This was what she'd been seeking when she left Philadelphia, though she had not known it at the time. Not just adventure or independence, but connection, family. A love so deep and true it redefined her understanding of what life could be. The years that followed brought more changes and growth. Carter proved to be a healthy, active child who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both parents. He had his father's physical strength and his mother's intellectual curiosity, and he was equally comfortable tracking animals in the forest with Jacob or learning letters and numbers from Beatrice. Beatrice returned to teaching when Carter was old enough, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse where he became something of a mascot for the other students. Jacob expanded their land, building a larger barn and acquiring more livestock. They became pillars of the community, Jacob serving on the town council and Beatrice organizing educational programs and library initiatives. In the spring of 1877, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son they called Michael. The cabin that had once housed a solitary mountain man now rang with the laughter and chaos of children, and Jacob proved to be every bit as devoted and loving a father as Beatrice had known he would be. One evening in the summer of 1880, Beatrice sat on the porch watching Jacob teach their children how to identify animal tracks in the dirt. Carter was 10 now, serious and studious, asking detailed questions. Sarah was 3, more interested in collecting pretty stones than learning about wildlife. Michael was just a year old, content to sit in the grass and babble to himself. Beatrice thought back to that scared, sheltered girl who had stepped off the stagecoach 8 years ago, so determined to be brave despite having no idea what she was walking into. She thought about the women who had pitied her for knowing nothing of men, who had worried she would be taken advantage of or hurt. They had been wrong, though their concern had come from caring. Beatrice had learned about men, specifically about one extraordinary man who had shown her what true partnership and respect and love looked like. Jacob had kept his promise from that very first day. She had known only good things from him: patience and kindness, strength and gentleness, passion and tenderness, joy and love so deep it sometimes took her breath away. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, having noticed her watching them. He walked over and sat beside her on the porch steps, his arm automatically coming around her shoulders. "How lucky I am," Beatrice said honestly. "How one decision to be brave led to everything I have now." "I am the lucky one," Jacob countered. "You took a chance on a rough mountain man when you could have chosen safety and propriety." "You were safety," Beatrice said, "just not the kind I had been taught to recognize." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their children play in the golden evening light. Then Jacob leaned over and kissed her temple, his beard tickling her skin in the familiar way that always made her smile. "I love you, Beatrice Northwood," he said softly. "More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Jacob Northwood," Beatrice replied, turning to kiss him properly. "Thank you for showing me what love really means." As the sun set behind the mountains and their children's laughter rang out in the clear air, Beatrice reflected on the beautiful, unexpected life she had built. She had left Philadelphia seeking adventure and found so much more. She had found purpose in teaching, community in Elko, and in Jacob, she had found a love that exceeded anything she had ever imagined possible. The women who had pitied her that first day had been right in one way. She truly had known nothing of men when she arrived. But Jacob had taught her, not through words but through actions, not through grand gestures but through daily devotion, what a good man looked like, what it meant to be loved and respected and cherished. And every day since, she had been grateful for the courage that had brought her west, for the twist of fate that had put her in Jacob's path, and for the life they had built together in these wild, beautiful mountains. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Carter grew into a young man who combined his father's practical skills with his mother's love of learning, eventually becoming a surveyor mapping the expanding territory. Sarah developed a passionate interest in medicine after helping the town doctor with a difficult case, and she set her sights on attending medical school back east, though she promised to return to Nevada to practice. Michael proved to be a natural horseman and rancher, taking over more of the livestock operations as Jacob's focus shifted to other pursuits. In 1885, when Beatrice was 34 and Jacob 42, they welcomed an unexpected fourth child, a daughter they named Grace. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Jacob declared himself blessed beyond measure to have another chance at fatherhood with the wisdom that came from experience. The cabin had been expanded several more times over the years, growing from that original simple structure into a sprawling home that could accommodate their large family and the frequent guests who came to visit. The schoolhouse in town had been rebuilt and expanded as well, with Beatrice serving as headmistress and helping to shape the education of an entire generation of Nevada children. But it was not just their own family that benefited from the love Beatrice and Jacob shared. Over the years, they had taken in several children who needed temporary homes, provided sanctuary for women fleeing difficult situations, and offered guidance to countless young couples just starting out. Their home became known as a place of safety and acceptance, where anyone who genuinely needed help could find it. One afternoon in the autumn of 1890, Beatrice was preparing dinner when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a young woman standing on the porch, looking exhausted and frightened. She was well-dressed but disheveled, clearly a city woman out of her element. "Can I help you?" Beatrice asked gently. "I am looking for Beatrice Northwood," the woman said. "Someone in town said she might be able to help me. I am running from an arranged marriage to a cruel man. I have nowhere else to go." Beatrice smiled and opened the door wider. "Come in. You are safe here." As she settled the young woman at the table with hot tea and food, Jacob came in from outside and took in the situation with one glance. He caught Beatrice's eye and nodded, that simple gesture communicating volumes. They would help, of course. They always did. Later that night, after their unexpected guest was settled in one of the spare rooms and the household was quiet, Beatrice and Jacob sat together on their bed, preparing for sleep. "She reminds me of you," Jacob said. "That scared, brave look, determined to forge her own path but terrified of what that means." "I was thinking the same thing," Beatrice admitted. "I keep wondering what would have happened to me if you had not offered me shelter that first day. If I had been left to the mercy of that rowdy hotel or the judgment of the town." "Someone else would have helped," Jacob said confidently. "You would have found your way." "Maybe," Beatrice allowed, "but I am so very glad it was you, that I learned about love and partnership from you specifically." Jacob pulled her close, and even after 18 years of marriage, the embrace felt like coming home. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life over the one you could have had?" "Not once," Beatrice said immediately. "Not even for a moment. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed. A purpose, a family, a love that challenges me and supports me and makes me grateful every single day. Those women in town, the ones who pitied you for knowing nothing of men," Jacob said thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about them?" "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "Mrs. Henderson passed away 2 years ago, but Mrs. Cooper is still around. She told me recently that watching our marriage over the years taught her what love could look like, that she wished she had been brave enough to choose passion over propriety when she was young." "That is something," Jacob said. "It is everything," Beatrice corrected. "We did not just build a life together, Jacob. We showed other people that it was possible to do things differently, to choose love and respect over social expectations, to build partnerships rather than following traditional roles. She turned in his arms to face him. Even at 42, Jacob was still powerfully built and handsome, though his dark hair was now streaked with silver, and his face bore the lines of a life well lived. To Beatrice, he had never been more attractive. "You kept your promise," she said softly, "from that very first day. You said I would know only good things from you, and you have spent nearly 2 decades proving it true." "Keeping that promise has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Jacob said. "Loving you, treating you well, building this life together. It has never been a burden or an obligation. It has been my greatest joy." He kissed her then, slow and sweet and familiar, and Beatrice marveled at how even after all these years his touch could still make her heart race and her breath catch. Some things never changed, and the connection between them was one of those eternal things. The young woman they had taken in stayed with them for several weeks, while Jacob helped her make arrangements to continue west to California, where she had family who would support her decision to refuse the arranged marriage. When she left, she hugged Beatrice tightly and thanked her for showing her what was possible. "Watching you and your husband," the woman said, "seeing how he respects you and how you work together as equals, it gave me hope that I could find something like that for myself someday." "You will," Beatrice assured her. "Be brave enough to choose what you want rather than what is expected. The right person will meet you there." After the woman left, Jacob came up behind Beatrice and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "Another one saved," he murmured. "Another one given a chance," Beatrice corrected, "the way you gave me a chance all those years ago." The years continued to unfold in a pattern of work and love, challenge and triumph, loss and growth. They buried friends and celebrated births, weathered economic hardships and natural disasters, adapted to changes in the West as the frontier became less wild and more settled. Through it all, their love remained constant, not static or boring, but constant in the sense that it was always there, always solid, always the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still made each other laugh. They still occasionally argued, usually about practical matters like how to handle a difficult situation or whether to expand the livestock operation. They still desired each other, their physical connection deepening rather than fading with time. In 1895, on their 23rd wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Beatrice with a trip back to Philadelphia. Carter was managing the property, Sarah was in medical school in Boston, Michael was helping at a neighboring ranch, and Grace was old enough to stay with friends in town. It was the perfect time for the journey. Beatrice had not been back to her hometown since she left in 1872. Her parents had both passed away, but her sisters still lived there with their families. The reunion was bittersweet. Her sisters had married as expected, to appropriate men from good families. They had comfortable lives, fine houses, and seemed content. But as Beatrice watched them and listened to them talk about their marriages, about managing servants and hosting parties and maintaining social standing, she realized how vastly different her life had become. Her sisters spoke of their husbands with fondness, but not passion, with respect, but not deep connection. They had partnerships of convenience and social expectation, not partnerships of the heart. "Do not you ever wish for more?" Beatrice asked her middle sister Eleanor during a private moment. "More what?" Eleanor asked, genuinely confused. "More connection, more passion, more partnership?" Eleanor laughed. "That's not what marriage is for, Beatrice. Marriage is for security and social standing and raising children properly. What you are describing sounds exhausting." "It is exhilarating," Beatrice corrected, "and fulfilling in ways I cannot even explain." Later, when she and Jacob were alone in their hotel room, Beatrice told him about the conversation. "Do you think I am strange," she asked, "for wanting all the things I want from marriage from you?" "I think you are extraordinary," Jacob said, "and I think those women have no idea what they are missing." "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Beatrice asked. "If I had not stepped off that stagecoach in Elko?" Jacob pulled her into his arms, and she settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I try not to think about it," he admitted, "because a life without you in it seems impossibly empty. I would have survived, I suppose, kept trapping and hunting and living alone in the mountains, but I would not have truly lived, Not the way I have with you." "I feel the same," Beatrice whispered. "Everything good in my life traces back to you. Our children, our home, our community, all of it started because you offered me shelter and showed me what real love looks like." They made love that night in the expensive hotel, and despite the elegant surroundings, Beatrice found herself longing for their cabin in the mountains, for the life they had built together in Nevada. This was not her world anymore. She had outgrown it, evolved beyond it, become someone entirely different from the sheltered girl who had left all those years ago. When they returned home 2 weeks later, riding up the familiar road to the cabin with the mountains rising around them, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "This is where I belong," she said aloud, "here, with you, in this life we built." "Always and forever," Jacob agreed, reaching over to take her hand. The turn of the century brought new challenges and changes. Nevada was rapidly modernizing, with telegraph lines and improved roads connecting even remote areas. The school in Elko expanded again, and Beatrice found herself training other teachers to meet the growing demand for education. Jacob's skills as a tracker and guide became less necessary as the wilderness shrank, but he adapted, using his knowledge of the land to help ranchers and farmers manage their properties more effectively. Carter married a lovely woman from town and built his own home not far from his parents, beginning the next generation of Northwoods in Nevada. Sarah returned from medical school and established a practice in Elko, becoming one of the few female doctors in the territory. Michael partnered with Jacob in a successful ranching operation, and Grace, their youngest, showed early signs of inheriting her mother's love of teaching and her father's practical wisdom. In the summer of 1903, Jacob and Beatrice celebrated their 30th anniversary. The whole family gathered at the cabin, along with friends from all over the region. It was a joyous celebration, full of laughter and stories and love. As Beatrice looked around at all the people who had become part of their lives, at the children and grandchildren, at the friends who were as close as family, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 3 decades ago, she had been a frightened girl stepping into the unknown. Now she was a woman who had lived fully, loved deeply, and made a real difference in the world around her. That evening, after everyone had left and they were alone again, Jacob and Beatrice walked up to the ridge above the cabin to the spot where they often went to watch the sunset. They stood together, his arm around her shoulders, her arm around his waist, and watched the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. 30 years, Jacob said softly. "It seems like both forever and no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean," Beatrice said. "Some days I still feel like that girl who first arrived, so out of her depth and trying so hard to be brave." "You were brave," Jacob said. "Braver than you knew. Brave enough to trust me when everyone said you should not. Brave enough to build a life that looked nothing like what you were raised to expect." "I could be brave because you made me feel safe," Beatrice said, "because you kept your promise. I knew only good things from you, Jacob, only love and respect and partnership and joy." Jacob turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Even at 60, he was still strong and solid, still capable of making her feel cherished and desired. "You have been the greatest blessing of my life, Beatrice Northwood. Every day with you has been a gift." "And every day with you has been an adventure," Beatrice replied. "Even the quiet ones, even the hard ones, because I got to experience them with you." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, 2 people who had found in each other everything they had not known to look for. 2 people who had built a love so strong and true that it had weathered 3 decades and emerged even more beautiful for the testing. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new experiences and challenges. They welcomed more grandchildren, celebrated Carter's success in business, watched Sarah pioneer medical techniques, saw Michael expand the ranching operation, and supported Grace's decision to open a school for girls that emphasized both traditional education and practical skills. In 1910, on a warm spring morning, Jacob and Beatrice sat on their porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, as they had done countless times before. Jacob was 67 now, Beatrice 59. They had slowed down somewhat with age, but they were both still active and healthy, still engaged with life and each other. "Do you remember that first morning?" Beatrice asked, "when I woke up in your cabin for the first time and you were making breakfast? I remember thinking you looked scared and determined all at once, Jacob said, and I remember knowing even then that you were going to change everything. You changed everything, Beatrice corrected. You showed me what life could be, what love should be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together in the way only people who have shared decades can be. No need for constant conversation, perfectly content in each other's presence. Those women in town, Beatrice said eventually, the ones who pitied me for knowing nothing of men, I've been thinking about them lately. Why is that? Because they were right to pity that girl I was, Beatrice said thoughtfully. She was so innocent and naive. She had no idea what real life looked like. But then you came along and promised she would know only good things from you. And you kept that promise, Jacob. For 38 years now, you have kept that promise. Jacob reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. It has been easy to keep. Loving you well has never been a chore or a burden. It has been the privilege of my life. I love you, Beatrice said simply, more now than ever before. I did not think that was possible, but somehow it is true. I love you too, Jacob replied. Always have, always will. They watched the sun climb higher, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Their life together stretched out behind them, full of memories and experiences, challenges overcome and joys celebrated. And ahead of them, however many years they had left, more time to love and be loved, to be together in this life they had built with their own hands and hearts. Beatrice thought about that frightened girl stepping off the stagecoach in Elko all those years ago. She thought about how everyone had pitied her for her innocence and inexperience. And she thought about the mountain man who had offered her shelter and then offered her everything. Jacob had been right that very first day. She had known only good things from him, only love and respect, strength and gentleness, passion and partnership. He had taught her what it meant to be loved well, and in doing so, he had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. As they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their entire story, Beatrice felt complete contentment settle over her. This was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of love strong enough to weather anything. This was what home felt like, not a place, but a person. The person who had promised her good things and had spent nearly 4 decades proving that promise true. This was what forever meant. Not just time passing, but time cherished, every day a choice to love and be loved in return. The sun rose fully over the mountains, beginning another day in their beautiful, hard-won, absolutely perfect life together. And Beatrice, who had once known nothing of men but had learned everything from the right one, smiled and squeezed her husband's hand, grateful beyond words for the courage that had brought her west and the love that had taught her what it meant to truly live. The end.